pulling long nights, right? Or working on the weekends, but it is not going to be the norm for me. And it's just not a way to live life at that level. It's just not sustainable from a very basic
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, but it's also not fulfilling to any degree if anybody's
Right.
really honest with themselves about it.
Welcome back to the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. In this week's episode, join Michael Kahn for an informative and thought-provoking interview with Kathryn Burmeister, an unconventional animal-loving lawyer, author, and speaker.
Today, Kathryn Burmeister, who is the founder of Burmeister Law Firm, which have offices in Roswell and Atlanta, I believe. Kathryn, you can correct me on that. And she's also the author of Overcoming Addiction to the Status Quo, which I think is a very interesting title. And I'm looking forward to talking to Kathryn more about the title and the book itself. So, Kathryn, welcome to the Thriving Lawyers Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am too, as well. Kathryn and I actually met at a program for the, Kathryn, again, tell me if I have this right, the North Fulton County Bar Association?
Yep.
Is that right?
That was it.
Okay. Did a program, I believe it was wellness related or something like that, a few months ago. And Kathryn attended. And then we've connected since then. And she has very graciously offered to do this podcast interview. And we were talking before we started recording, and apparently Kathryn has done so many podcast interviews, she couldn't remember one that I asked her about. So it was hard for her to remember. So she's out there talking about her experiences as a lawyer and about the book. And I think the more she's out there talking about this, the better for the legal profession. So I am completely, not that you need my support, Kathryn, but I say more power to you.
I appreciate
Especially
that.
running your own law firm too, and doing podcasts. I don't know how you do it all.
Yeah, it's been a little busy, but it's been great to have those conversations with a bunch of different people and have people receiving it so well.
Great. Yeah. So I'm going to start with, Kathryn, I looked at your website, and you had a quote on there. Let's just start with your practice as a lawyer, and then we'll have a lot of time talking about the book. But on your website about the Burmeister Law Firm, you say that you're an unconventional lawyer. Well, unconventional and animal-loving lawyer. So I want to have you just expand on that a bit. I'm intrigued by the unconventional piece, and I'm drawn to the animal-loving piece because I am a real animal lover, and particularly dogs. So let's talk about that quote. Tell me more about what you mean by unconventional lawyer.
Definitely. So I practice personal injury exclusively, but even just as a lawyer, I consider myself unconventional, first and foremost, because I really bring a holistic approach to my clients. I tailor their needs and my response to their needs based on what's best for them at the end of the day. I don't try to fit them into a particular mold, whereas so many people I think really it's either the churn and burn firms that are PI firms, the billboard ad type people that are just running through cases as fast as they can. Or a lot of people just don't care, quite frankly. I mean, we all have to make a living. I appreciate that, but we don't have to do it at the expense of our clients. And I think a lot of people have lost sight of that or just never had sight of it to begin with. So being holistic with my legal approach and then also running my practice, I've been remote since before COVID. So I started my firm in fall of 2018 and I wanted to keep my overhead low to begin with. So I didn't get dedicated office space. I did know that I was going to need some help because while I've done everything from legal secretary up until lawyer in my career, it's way too much for personal injury in particular to do it all yourself and then also be bringing in all the work on top of it. So I've run everything remotely, and I've stayed that way. And I've had paralegals that are all out of state, and I've had them for 2 years working for me. So really kind of turning everything on its head in terms of the convention of, the legal profession as a whole. I think a lot of people think that it has to be a certain way because it's been that way for so long. And it's a very antiquated profession generally. So people fall into that trap of thinking it has to stay that way because somebody said it did a long time ago. So
Right.
I'm always about pivoting when I need to, learning new things, trying other things out. I always think there's room for improvement and there's better ways to do things that I may not have come across yet. So that's what I mean by unconventional.
Yeah, and I like what you said about there's nothing sacred about some of the aspects of practicing law. I'm a former lawyer and currently a licensed professional counselor, therapist, and I tell clients that all the time. There's nothing special about the 50-minute hour, but that's kind of like the magical time that most of us therapists have come up with to meet with clients. But it's there are some sessions with clients that end after a half hour because they're done.
Right.
They've gotten what they need. And there's some that yesterday I did an hour with a client because that ending at 50 minutes just would not have been helpful for that client. So, and it's consistent, Katherine, with the title of your book. And again, we'll go to the book in a moment, but the whole idea of the status quo, you're definitely opposed. You fight against the status quo, both personally and it sounds like professionally.
I do. I do. It's something that I had to work really hard at, and it was basically out of necessity that it came about. But I do believe that we can consciously make a choice to overcome that addiction to the status quo. And when I say addiction, I genuinely believe it is. I'm not here to say one addiction is worse than another. They're all bad. I am here to say, though, that the addiction to the status quo, I think, leads to a lot of other problems because our obsession with really focusing on what we should be in our life, these preconceived societal shoulds, we should be a certain way, we shouldn't be a certain way. It's either we push it on ourselves or, it's being externally forced on us by other people. It really catches us, doing a lot of things that I don't think inherently most people would do, right? I mean, we all know, as an example, stealing money is bad, but how many people have we heard of or seen in the news that do it? And you think, how could they possibly be doing that? Or they seem like a really good person. Why would they do that?
Right.
And it's because they're caught up in the status quo. And, I don't think everybody is bad. It's just we've all kind of become obsessed with this idea of what should be in our lives. And a lot of people, I think, fall into a trap of going down that road toward their own detriment and the detriment of a lot of other people because it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah, you say in your book that I'm just reading one of the quotes from your book. Perhaps to varying degrees and at different points, one can have some things together, but the majority of the time, it's all just plowing onward, head down, and addicted to the status quo. Comfort is taken in the idea that one just may be doing a little better than the next person, or even if that's not the case, one can pass as being successful while continuing to succumb to losing pieces of oneself so slowly. Would you say, I assume you're speaking about your own experience there?
I am. I I definitely fell into the thought of if I work hard enough, I'll get to where I want to be. Or where I deserve to be. And I say deserve after hard work, not that I'm entitled to anything. But the reality is life doesn't go as planned and nothing is guaranteed. So despite knowing that, I still continue to plow ahead and everybody, keeps up that facade and that mask and the armor of I'm successful, and success is very, very often measured by money, accomplishments professionally, what kind of house you have, what kind of car you have. I was more focused on my professional accomplishments. I valued myself based on my identity as a lawyer and what I could accomplish. I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was in middle school. And because of that, I obviously put a huge amount into my life, invested in getting to that point. So thinking, okay, if I invest enough time, I'll get to where I want to be. and then having all of that thrown out the window when the rug was jerked out from underneath me a few times really made me realize, one, that that's not how life works. Two, it's not a fulfilling way to go through life at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you go on further in your book, if you don't mind me sharing another quote, that my status quo addiction manifested in the following ways: addicted to being perfect, believing I should always be and do more, believing that if I didn't accomplish certain things by a certain time or way, I wasn't enough, believing that no matter what I accomplished, it was not enough, believing that my anxiety and depression, though actively managed, was a weakness and a failure on my part, underestimating my abilities, thriving off external validation, and more.
Yep, all of those. um,
Yeah.
it's I think a lot of it, and I talk about it in the book a little bit, I think we're a product naturally of our environment, and then also part of who we are, just how we're wired. I was
Mm-hmm.
raised, I'm an only child. So, but I was raised by very involved parents that weren't helicopter parents at all, just very involved in what I was doing. And I was someone who achieved above average. And so from an early age, that standard was kind of set for me. So anything less than what my normal was below my average.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my parents never said like, oh, if you aren't doing X, Y, and Z, you're a failure. That was never said. And it wasn't even implied. But because I got so much praise from family, from teachers, like we all do, it's easy to get swept up in that idea that your value is tied to what you can do, not who you are.
The external validation you
Yep.
mentioned.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So you and my guess is, and you wrote this book not just for lawyers, right? Because I noticed in the book you directed some discussion to other professionals like doctors and entrepreneurs and professional athletes. This is
Right.
something not unique to lawyers necessarily.
No, and really, addiction to the status quo is not unique to any one group of people. I mean, I think even the stay-at-home mom can get swept up in trying to
Mm,
keep up with what everybody else is doing. But the reason I
mm-hmm.
talk to professionals, and particularly professionals in zero-sum professions, so doctors, lawyers, nurses, corporate executives, and elite athletes, are the addiction to the status quo manifests itself more drastically, I think, and more quickly in those professions. So very much in elite athletes, if they're not winning, they're losing. For me, if I'm not winning cases, I'm losing. For
That's right.
doctors and nurses, if people aren't surviving, they're dying. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in a corporate sense too, I mean, it's such a high pressure position that if you're not succeeding, you're failing. And it's easy to be reduced to that instead of who you are and what you're accomplishing. And we all know, I think, intuitively that the world's not black and white, but by God, we still try to live by that every day, I think. So really showing that those professions are victims of the status quo, I think, more often than other areas.
Yeah, and I want to drill down a little deeper with you personally. Um, you said earlier the rug was pulled out from under you a couple times or a few times. I want to hear more about that. But before we go there, I also want to have you respond to the idea of we did a workshop. I do a workshop called Bolstering Resilience with a couple of colleagues, and the focus is on the individual. This is for lawyers, on what they can do differently to bolster the resilience. And at the end, we had a Q&A, and one of the participants said, "This is all well and good, but if we need to talk about you're putting all of the responsibility on the individual. You're not talking at all about the systemic nature of the problem here. And I'm talking about law."
Right.
And it was a great comment. And we spoke more about it after that question, of course. But I'm curious your thoughts about that. That the individual can be addicted, and the individual can do things that help build their resilience and their ability to find contentment in the law. But what about if the system itself is unhealthy?
I I think it makes it harder, undoubtedly. And sometimes we have to go through experiences like I did where, you see the really bad side of things. But I really think the only thing we can control is our response to those things. So, yes, in a perfect world, we would revamp the legal profession, but I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
Billable hours aren't going anywhere, huh?
No. But I have to say, a lot of bars are talking about mental health and suicide prevention. So I think we're making headway, but it can't just be lip service, right?
Right.
And it can't just be either you're happy or you're suicidal. There's, again, a lot of gray in between those 2 points.
That's right. There's the not thriving. There's the not thriving part between
right.
doing great and addicted. And the wellness. Are you familiar with the? I don't know the exact name of it, but the Wellness Institute on Lawyer Wellbeing.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So they talk about that in their report that they put out a couple years ago, that there's that huge in-between place of folks who are not addicted and not doing great. They're that kind of just not thriving.
Right. And I'm really trying to reach those people because I think I felt this way, and I think a lot of people who are overachievers do feel this way. The idea that if you're not happy, especially when you see all these things that you have, right? So if you are working at a good law firm and you do have a number of cases and you've won a number of cases and you're growing professionally, why aren't you happy? I think we start to think that we're deficient in some way. And it comes from a place of privilege, right? I mean, we have a great job in theory, right? We have means to cover our basic needs, but it doesn't mean that people don't still experience emotional hardship. And we don't really sit and figure out what that is, because I always thought if I checked off all of these boxes, I'm a recovering box checker, by the way. If I checked off all these boxes,
I'm a recovering line crosser outer.
Oh, okay, yeah. I would be happy. And so when I got my dream job, it was probably 3 months, 4 months after that I sat there and went, well, what do I do now? I don't know what to do with myself, and I don't have that, euphoria of being happy. So what's gone wrong? What haven't I done? And again, it goes back to, it's not egotistical. For me, it was just, I could only control myself, so I must have done something wrong. And that's just not the reality. You can't, happiness is not something you check off. And it's not something that once you achieve it, it stays there without any work. It's definitely an ongoing part of your life, but it becomes a whole lot easier and more manageable, I believe, with experience and practice at it. But it takes getting over the addiction to the status quo first and foremost to even start down that path.
Yeah. So why don't I want to obviously have you speak about how you did that. So I think the listeners will benefit from what worked for you. But before we go there, share, if you would, just as much as you want, what you referred to earlier about the rug being pulled out from under you, and as you talk about in your book, hitting rock bottom.
Yeah. I passed the bar. I was working for a partner who made a lot of promises and said he was willing to invest in me. And he basically reneged on those promises. And I was told I was a luxury that he couldn't afford. I just didn't really know how to take that. And then I held out for another plaintiff's job because I've worked big law before I got my license, and there was no way I was going back to that.
As did you say a legal assistant?
Yeah, as a document clerk. And I saw how soul-sucking that was for so many people, attorneys, admin across the board. It's a soul-sucking environment. And I think very few people disagree on that point. Maybe if they came up in the 90s when it was all, glamorous and they actually got to try cases. But nowadays, I feel like it's very different mentality and model than it used to be. But I held out for that dream job. I found it. I found a partner who had been practicing for 30 years, who had a couple associates close to my age, and really taught us by letting us do it. He was always there for support and guidance, but he didn't try to keep us under his thumb. So he taught us really well, and I learned a ton in a relatively short amount of time. I was managing my own cases. I had a paralegal that helped me with things. I was doing, depositions, doctor's depositions. So he really taught us well. And I'd say about a year and a half after I'd started there, I got a call. Well, I got a text early in the morning, and it was from the senior associate. He said that the attorneys need to be in before staff. And in my mind, again, because I had that mentality that I'd had for so long, it's like, well, I did something wrong. Clearly,
Right.
clearly this wouldn't be happening if I hadn't done something, which is silly.
Right.
But that's when you've told yourself that for so long, and that's your
Mhm.
internal dialogue. It's just natural to go to that. So we got there.
Kathryn, if I can interrupt just for a second, would you
Yeah,
say you were the type of person who, when something bad happened, it was
yeah.
your responsibility, but if something good happened, it was something external to you, or were you able to also uh, take responsibility for the good things too?
I could take responsibility for the good, but I had a hard time accepting compliments. So I may see that I had put effort into it, but it was almost that, okay, well, that's great, but that's the way you should have done it to begin with. Like, you
Uh-huh.
should be over and above average, so
Right.
it's not that big of a
Right.
deal.
Right.
So that's how I
Okay.
was, and
Yeah.
we came in that morning, and it was just us associates, and our senior associate told us that our partner had committed suicide.
Hmm.
I wrote letters. He left letters for us. He left letters for the bar, the state bar. He left letters for his daughters, and he had been stealing
Wow.
from clients for 8 years.
Hmm.
So, aside from the shock of someone taking their own life, there was obviously the rest of it that had to do with the clients and reconciling who we thought this person was with what he did to our
Yeah.
clients. And it was really, really tough. He had lied to our senior associate about the overhead numbers, and the senior associate had grown up with his daughters, the partner's daughters. So they had a lot of history. So there was even more emotional damage done there, of course, because of that. But yeah, he lied about the overhead, so there was no way we were going to be able to keep doing what we were doing as a firm. We very quickly realized that we were going to have to pivot and either start a new firm or continue this in some form or fashion. And basically, it came down to the senior associate, myself, and a paralegal. We all decided to band together and keep trying to move things forward. And what ultimately happened from that was my senior associate, now partner, he checked out mentally and physically. He was just not there,
Hmm.
even though his name was on the door. And I fully,
In response to the suicide, he
right,
was too traumatized to be present
right,
in the
right.
practice.
And
Hmm.
I'm an extremely empathetic person and
Hmm.
sympathetic, but we were all experiencing that too.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
all had responsibilities that we had to push through. And so everything basically fell on me. I ended up
Hmm.
running that practice for an entire year
By default.
by default. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't writing the checks to, pay ourselves, but everything else
Right.
I was doing.
Hmm.
So it was a lot. I mean, I'm not downplaying the impact on each of us, but we all still had to show up at work and take care of our clients. That's the thing about the law. I think there's
Hmm.
unrealistic standards put on us about what we have to do for our clients. It is almost to our own detriment a lot of times, and I just don't think that's a healthy approach.
Yeah. So say more about that. The unrealistic standards.
Yeah, I mean, we have professional obligations, obviously, but I mean, there's so many things what other business or industry would we say that, you know, we have to do so many things to protect our clients' interests, even if it's only even remotely not questionable, but just it seems to be the case in the legal profession that we are expecting us to be pushing ourselves to the nth degree, come hell or high
Hmm.
water, for our clients' benefit. And in any
Hmm.
other area, it would not be that way, right? I think of the medical fields maybe that way. But even then, that's literally life or death. And for us, I'm not saying it's not important what lawyers do and the types of cases that they handle, but
Mhm.
most of the time, it's not life or death. And I think
And,
it pushes a
and
lot of
it's
lawyers.
interesting. It's interesting, Kathryn. Sorry for interrupting you again, but I've heard the medical and legal fields compared in terms of stress. And someone said, and specifically thinking of lawyers who do litigation, um, if you're a doctor, if you're a surgeon and you're operating, you don't have someone coming into the room trying to knock the scalpel out of your hand.
Right.
When you're a lawyer, when you're a lawyer in the competitive field of law and litigation, that's what the other side does, right? I mean, it's
Absolutely.
about trying to trip you up or find a weakness in your case or anything that will achieve their goal, which is zealously defending and representing their client.
Well, and that's the thing too. I think a lot of people have taken that zealously advocating to a whole
Hmm.
other interpretation, right?
Hmm.
Either by imposing unrealistic standards on themselves or just being complete and total assholes to the people they have to interact with on the other side.
Right, right.
Um, but regardless, I mean, we have obligations and I appreciate those. But when they do come at the expense of ourselves, it's just setting everybody up for failure at that point.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and personal injury
So
in
say,
particular. Oh, go ahead.
so if you wouldn't mind, just share a little bit more then about your journey after. So everything was laid on you at the firm. You're all still dealing with the aftermath of the partner killing himself. So what happened there then for you? How were you able to come out of this, or what happened to you before you came out of this?
Yeah, I was keeping it together. I was operating on adrenaline. I mean, for that entire year, there's no doubt about it. I finally did take a trip out of the country, and I got a call from my paralegal asking me a question, and I said, "I like you and I enjoy you, but why are you calling me when I'm halfway around the world?"
Hmm.
And she said, "I can't get a hold of our partner." And he knew, one, that I wasn't there, two, that we had a major deadline, and he needed to be accessible to her. And so I gave her the approval she needed. And I got back in the country, and he was off on a retreat in middle Georgia, on like a silent retreat. And it all just hit me at that point. It's not like I didn't know what had been happening. It's not like I wasn't experiencing it, but I couldn't do anything else. I literally could not process another thought. I couldn't keep
Mm.
it in a box anymore. I had to leave the office, and I called my husband on the way home and asked him to meet me there because of how concerned I was about where my thoughts were going. And this is when I've been in therapy and I've been on low levels of medication for my depression and anxiety. So it's been managed. I can't imagine what it
Hmm.
would have been like had it not been managed at the time. But it just goes to show that it's not again, you don't check off a box when it comes to mental health. But I have enough experience to know that I needed to have somebody there with me. And
Hmm.
after that night, it's almost as if a switch had been flipped. I saw things very clearly. I had thoughts and knowledge that I didn't need to keep doing this, that this wasn't sustainable, that this is not obviously a happy way to go through life. But it's one thing to know it, and it's a whole other thing to actually take action on it, because change, even if for the better, as you know,
Hmm.
is still scary.
Right.
Um,
Oh
and
yeah.
but right then, everything just came into focus, and
Yeah.
I was not going to tolerate it anymore.
Thank goodness. Right. And it's really kind of, it sounds like if I asked you more questions about, well, can you tell me more about how that switch went off, would you be able to say, I really don't know, it just kind of happened? They're just, for whatever reason, the events all kind of, everything kind of all, there was this perfect storm, and it led me to decide, okay, something's got to shift.
Yeah, that's incredibly true. And so when I started down this path of helping other people, uh, change their life and shift their perspective and trajectory, I really had to dig deep. And the book helped me do that too. Really dig deep about where I pulled from in my life to get past this point. Because obviously, trying to explain to somebody, I can't just say it's magic, right? It's not. And I definitely
Right.
believe that tragedy can help people grow, no doubt about it. But you do not have to experience trauma to live a better life or a more fulfilling life. I don't believe that at
Right.
all. So
Right. So then, okay, the switch was went off for you, and you decided, okay, I need to shift. So what did that look like? And share, is you don't have to go into lots of detail, but so what did, now that you had this realization, something's got to shift, then what?
I wasn't going to work for somebody again. I
Hmm.
never won my own business, never won my own law firm, but I
Hmm.
flat out refused to work for someone after this point.
Hmm. And
Obviously,
and and would you say, what was that about? I mean,
that
there's
was
there's some
trust issues,
obvious,
right?
yeah.
Some
Okay.
trust
Okay.
issues, and I haven't inherently had those in the past, but after everything, and then also the idea of giving my absolute all to a number of people that I really wanted to invest in, hoping that they would invest in me professionally. And it just didn't happen at all. I wasn't
Yeah.
going to keep putting
Yeah.
that effort in just to be discarded. Um, yeah.
We actually do a program for based on the film WinWin, which Paul Giamatti plays a solo practitioner who makes some. He's a decent guy. He's not this Hollywood villain, but he's got financial stressors and he makes a bad choice. And one of the programs we did, one of the attendees said she chose to become a solo practitioner because she could create the, the culture of ethics
Yep.
around her practice. She didn't have to worry about anybody else. Now, of course, she had to worry about herself and doing the right thing ethically. But I think of that when you say, I'm going to do a solo practice. You set the tone, you set the culture, ethics and otherwise. You don't have to worry about being blindsided by what happened to you, which was, of course, worst case scenario.
Absolutely. And, even with the associate I was working with, he was not pulling his weight. And at the end of the
Hmm.
day, you cannot
Hmm.
force somebody to do something that they don't want to do. And you
Hmm.
can't convince them to do it. So I gave it one last attempt at, making it work through some like business professional counseling type thing. Like, hey, what can we do? What next steps can we kind of make? And it just
Hmm.
wasn't going to happen. And it just solidified what I had already known it wasn't going to work. And I think the reason up until that point, aside from just not wanting to let go, I was scared to go out on my own
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
I'd always enjoyed that camaraderie of having at least another lawyer with me. But then
sure.
once I finally realized I'd already run a practice by myself for the entire year,
This is true.
it became really, I guess, comforting to know, oh, hey, I actually can do this because I have. And that's what really changed things. I had proven to myself that I was enough. And
Hmm.
when you ask me like what actually happened, when the switch was flipped, and
Yeah.
that's what it was. I'd proven to myself that I was enough. And that's a huge, powerful idea because for somebody who had the negative self-talk and always felt that they should be a certain way or they weren't enough, that's just insane. That's an insane
Hmm.
thought that it took
Mm.
all of that, all of that to
Hmm.
finally believe it. But that's what it
Hmm.
was. And I just took a lot of confidence in where I was and how I'd gotten there. And just decided, one, that I was going to do what I needed to do to make myself happy. And also finally not care what other people thought. And that's a huge
Hmm.
thing to get over.
Yeah. Yeah. And how are you doing with that?
I'm doing really well, actually. Yeah, I can't even go back to that mindset. Not that I won't let myself, I won't. But even if I ever try to say I'm going to push myself because somebody's going to think less of me if I don't, I can't get back there mentally. And thank God,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Hmm.
but I don't have to fight it. and myself, being myself, right? I don't have to fight myself like I used to. And that's a very great place to be after so much time and so much energy being spent otherwise.
Yeah, and it's not about. So you certainly have standards,
Yes.
and you can tell from your website, of course, it's pretty clear. And you certainly care about doing a good job and being thought of as competent and capable and caring about your clients. So it's not about I don't care about that. Screw other people. It's that it's not the be all and end all. That I must be liked, or I must be thought of in this way, or it's the end of the world. Not
Absolutely.
letting that lead your decisions, right?
Right. And I'm the first one. If I've got a major response to a motion due, I'm pulling long nights, right, or working on the
Hmm.
weekends. But it is not going to be the norm for me, and it's just not a way to live life uh, at that level. It's just not sustainable from a very basic
Hmm.
standpoint. But it's also not fulfilling to any degree if
Right.
anybody's really honest with themselves about it.
So were you still in therapy when you were making this change, when you were starting your own practice,
I
or
was, thank God. So
okay,
I had started
okay.
back with therapy a couple months after I'd started that job. And that's when I was kind of the where do I go now? Who am I? What do I do? And
Hmm.
which I just, like I said, I can't imagine not being in therapy and having gone through all of that stuff. But it was
Hmm.
very, very helpful to have someone who had been with me through that entire thing, to know
Right.
the whole backstory, obviously, and to help me process it and process it honestly, it's almost like the death of something, right? It's literal in one sense, but
Hmm.
even going away from the partner that I'd been with after that, it's
Yeah,
the death of a relationship, or
absolutely.
especially when you've gone through that much together in that short amount of time. It's intense to walk away
Yeah,
from something like that.
I do grief workshops for lawyers,
Yeah.
and sometimes the focus is solely on death, literally people and loved ones or folks who are close to them who have died. But sometimes I do groups around loss, but not loss around death. Loss that you're talking about
Yep.
around relationships, or the death of a practice,
Yep.
or dream. You may have had this dream that, okay, this is how this, I can imagine how this practice is going to look in 10 years or 15 years or 30 years.
Yep.
And so does that resonate with you as well?
Absolutely. And I feel like I remember reading somewhere or hearing somewhere that it takes about half the time to get over someone as the relationship itself lasted. And
Ah,
it
interesting.
really, looking back, it's, it was very true in my case. The time that I'd worked with this individual, was about 3 years, I guess. And it took me about a year and a half after that to fully
Hmm.
let
Hmm.
go. Um, because I am somebody who does care about people. I do care about the impact I have on those people. And
Hmm.
like I said, simply the fact of what we went through together in such a short amount of time, it was very traumatic. And so it was a lot to process, let alone walk away from. But again, it's the best thing that's happened to me. I would never wish it on my worst enemy,
Right.
but it is the best thing that's happened to me because it completely shifted my life for the better at such a relatively young age.
Well, there's a concept actually called post-traumatic growth, when you're dealing with, and there's research around this, dealing with a loss, a significant loss or trauma, that you can really grow from the experience of coping with the trauma or coping with the loss. Not that the loss is ever a good thing or the
Right.
trauma is ever a good thing, but how you cope with it, how you respond to it, can lead to growth, such
Absolutely.
as, right, such as looking back and thinking, wow, I dealt with this, I handled this, I came out the other side, and I had these strengths that I didn't know that I had.
Yep. And it's crazy because I'd done a lot of things up until that point where I had, established resilience, but it still was never enough in my mind to, I guess, satiate that idea of being enough. Right. until
Mm-hmm.
everything like that happened. And whenever I told people about what was going on or what has happened, they're like, that is literally the most insane thing. Like, how could you
Right.
say that you weren't doing enough? And I would never tell anyone else that, because I wouldn't believe that about anybody else. But for me, I held myself to a certain standard that if I didn't do the utmost of my ability, I was failing somehow. And so to be able to move past that feeling and not only move past it, but genuinely believe the opposite is a really just paramount thing in my life that's influencing so much better.
And as being a female, I know, of course, that it's changing a lot, and that more females, I think, are graduating from law school than males. At least last time I read that, I don't think it's changed. Um, but as being a female in the legal field, does that still provide you some hurdles that you have to deal with, or has that also changed?
I'd like to say it's changed, but not in my experience. I mean, I remember being in my first legal job in high school and being sexually harassed, but that doesn't happen anymore, at least. I
Hmm.
mean, for
Hmm.
me, it hasn't. But I also am an older and wouldn't tolerate it at all, because now I know how to cope and deal with interactions like that. But it's still just as much of a challenge to interact with colleagues and opposing counsel. I think, especially, I would have thought that on my own, I would have somehow, overcome some of that. Like, people would think I'm more legitimate, whatever that means, by having my own practice, or, at least respect me a little bit more. No, it hasn't. I still have to
Hmm.
work probably twice as hard as any of my male colleagues to get the same stuff done. Um, in particular, I have co-counsel on a case, which kind of makes it even worse. A number of very established and qualified attorneys, and they do great work, but they will not listen to me, will not give me the
Hmm.
time of day on the cases that we have together. And it's a big piece of litigation.
Hmm.
Um, it's to the point where I have to, actually, my last partner who I've referenced, I had to send emails over his signature to sometimes get things accomplished.
Hmm. Right. Right. They wouldn't take it seriously if it was your signature.
No. And then even when I pointed
Yeah.
out things that are major issues, I feel like I'm almost having to be an errant child to
Hmm.
get their attention. I mean, literally, to get them to
Hmm.
respond to an email, I have to start
Hmm.
being snarky or,
Right.
sarcastic. And it's
Right.
not for lack of trying before then to really be PC and, navigate these waters. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
baffling.
it's a catch-22 also, because when you are that way, then you're called a bitch, either
Oh, of
to your
course.
face or behind your back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. So it's definitely still challenging. But I think that may be more in personal injury, just because there's mostly
Mm.
men in
Hmm.
personal injury in particular. I know, like, family law has a lot more women in that area. So I'm hoping it's better in those areas, but personal injury is definitely not. And I think I don't expect it to really get any better anytime soon, unless there's more awareness about it, or even more women in there standing up and saying something
Right.
about it.
Right. All right. So let's just spend the rest of the time, Kathryn, unless you have anything else you wanted to add about what we've talked about, and certainly feel free to do that. But I want to spend the rest of the time just talking about what do you do day to day to to be resilient. I know, hopefully, that none of this stuff that you've described happens to you again. That's hopefully a once in a lifetime, or for most people, never in a lifetime experiences. But um, practicing law is difficult, right?
Yep.
So, what are the and these kind of these gremlins that you dealt with back in the day? They still probably they pop up still, I would imagine, every so often. So, what are some of the things you do day to day that help you cope, help you build resilience?
Yeah, I have a few very small things that people, I think, can implement right now.
Hmm.
One, the biggest thing is putting things in perspective. And I learned
Hmm.
this back when I worked at Big Law, because I'd be working 23 hours straight trying to do something for these people. And I would be putting so much pressure on myself. And I just stopped and realized I had to ask myself 2 questions. One, is anybody going to die? There's a reason I'm not a pilot. There's a reason I'm not a doctor. Okay. So, but for everybody, generally speaking, nobody's going to die, generally.
Okay.
And is there anything we can do about it? If there is, let's do it. If it's something that's already happened, let it go. That's all. I mean, literally, you have to let it go because you can't do anything about it. And that really, gives me the ability to focus on what really matters at that point in time. Worrying about what's already happened is not going to do you any good.
Right. It's pausing. It's building a pause in, like stepping back. That's what you mean, I think, by gaining perspective and stepping back and taking it all in and asking yourself those questions that you just posed, rather than just being on automatic pilot and not pausing, taking a breath, and asking those questions.
Absolutely. And another thing I do is, my therapist had taught me this, was when I start having this negative self-talk, ask myself, is there any evidence, especially as a lawyer, we all appreciate that. Is there any evidence to support that? And there's not. There never is, right? Because our self-talk is so much more negative. One, that we would ever say to anybody else, let alone what actually is occurring. And so if there's not any evidence to support it, then you can basically say, like, okay, my feeling is valid, right? But this is not reality. This is a distorted feeling or perception of reality. And I personally go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I was just going to say, I've personally delved into a lot of the psychology of just people generally, and it really helps breaking it down to, the science of it. So I think maybe part of it's being the lawyer in me. I'm able to say, okay, this is a feeling, but it's not real, right? For lack of a better phrase.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes you said, is there any evidence to support that? Sometimes there's evidence, such as you could be saying to yourself, you're right. It's right before a trial is going to start, and you're telling yourself, oh my gosh, this trial is this is going to be a disaster. Or I suck as a lawyer, even before the trial starts.
Right.
And if you drill down and ask yourself questions, okay, what's going on here? Why do I think the trial is going to be a disaster even before it starts? Or why do I think I suck as a lawyer? Well, if you ask yourself questions, you might eventually get to the point where you're realizing, oh, I haven't prepared my opening statement in a way that I'm comfortable with or confident with is a good way to start the trial. So great. That's something you can work with.
Right.
That is something that is fixable. And so that's what I mean by, sometimes when you have these thoughts, it can help to take a step back and look underneath them. And maybe there is something fixable there that's more reasonable and more realistic than exaggerating to the point where you're thinking the trial is going to be horrible or you're a horrible lawyer.
Exactly. And I mean, I think it's asking why 5 times, right? Kind of drilling down to the root of where that feeling's coming from. And that's really helpful. I've also been very focused on growth mindset since everything's happened. I mean, if anything ever prior to that had gone not according to plan, it was detrimental to me. That idea of not having control was just debilitating almost. And now like I said, if I can get past that, darn near anything else in my life, knock on wood, is going to be less intense. So it really does, help to be able to go into challenges and say, okay, what can I learn from this? What did I learn from it? As opposed to, oh my God, this is, just going to be absolutely traumatic, which is easy to do when you're tying your value as a human being to your ability to perform, especially in these professions where somebody's going to lose, right? It's hard to get to that point.
Yeah, those are really 3 solid things that I could see helping you very much, putting things in perspective, pushing back against negative self-talk, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, has been proven through years and years of research to be a very effective way to improve your your attitude, improve your emotions, to just not accept these negative tapes that we have. And then the growth mindset is also really exceptional, because I think a lot of lawyers struggle with that. A lot of lawyers struggle with when things don't go according to plan, when there is change. That can be really difficult for a lot of attorneys.
Right. And I think a lot of it might be personality, but I think also my
Mm.
generation in particular, I think I was the last of the generation that didn't just get participation trophies. So I think everybody after me is going to have a real hard time dealing with that concept of, not having a fixed mindset and encountering
Mhm.
adversity in a
Right,
healthy way and developing
right,
resilience. But there's definitely tools out there. And like you said, I mean, there's plenty of people that are older than me that have a hard time. And I think that goes back to the winning or losing mentality that, if you lose a trial, somebody has to lose, right? If you lose a
right,
trial, it's not, generally speaking, it's not you. You're not the reason, right? Somebody at some point
right.
can do the best they can and you're still gonna have a
That's right.
loser. But not taking that to mean that you're a loser, right? The difference between
Right.
what is it? I am bad versus I did something bad. Uh,
Exactly.
so that's it's a semantics, idea, but it really does make a difference in how you approach things.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I was going to make a point about that, and it just escaped me about that. Shoot, I hate when that happens.
Hmm.
Um, so hopefully it'll pop in my head before we're done, and we've got just a few minutes left, Kathryn. But do you have any tools that you use? Any other tools that you use that even something maybe that you can do with us on the podcast? Is there a breathing exercise that you do, or something else, something quick and easy that you can describe to us? And if not, I'm put you on the spot. We didn't talk about this much
No, that's
before we
okay.
started.
I couldn't really do it per se, but I use an app. I use the
Hmm.
breathing app. There's a ton of them out
Okay.
there, but breath
Okay.
is the one.
Okay. It's actually called breath.
Uh, of course, now it's like wanting to do an update. I think breathing is what it is technically, but
Breathing.
there's a number of them out
Okay.
there.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and they're visual in nature too, which is nice.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and it, so we can reason our way through a lot of these thoughts, but sometimes you just can't override what you're feeling in that moment.
Hmm.
And so having something to distract yourself with, like focusing on your breathing, really helps,
Hmm. Yeah.
center yourself at the end of the day. And what I also
Yeah.
do is I listen to myself, and I have the luxury of doing this because I have my own business. But if I am just hitting a wall and I can't get through what I need to, or it's just been one of those days, I step
Yeah.
away. Maybe in the middle of the week, take the afternoon for a couple hours to watch shows on Netflix just to
Yeah.
decompress. And because there's no sense in pushing yourself through something if you're just going to keep hitting the wall over and over and over
That's right.
again. I mean, you're not helping
That's
anyone
right.
at that point.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think that's great that you're able to do that. That can be hard for a lot of folks to step away
I
and
agree.
know that, you know what, in the long term, this is actually going to be better. I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to be more productive if I step away and watch Netflix for a couple hours, or go for a jog, or go have an ice cream sundae or whatever,
Yeah.
just to get away.
Well, even people that are in firms or, any other job, literally going in and sitting in the bathroom, like
Hmm. Hmm.
just taking 10, 15 minutes. I mean, what's somebody going to do?
Yeah.
Come bother you while you're in the bathroom? It shouldn't be.
Right.
But take that time and just work on the breathing app. It finally, breathing zone is the one I would,
Breathing zone.
yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and just take that time to yourself, because here's the biggest thing that I've learned. Nobody else is going to do this for you. Nobody is going
Hmm.
to start drawing these boundaries. Nobody is going to say that you shouldn't be doing this to
Hmm.
yourself. They may say it, but
Hmm.
they're not going to be able to
Hmm.
change it for you. And
Right.
so you have to take control of what you're willing to endure in your life. And no matter what you believe, spiritually, religiously, life is relatively short, and none of
Hmm.
us know how long we have. So it's my firm belief that you should live life to its fullest and genuinely live a life of happiness, which is being the best version of yourself. It's not going to be rainbows and kittens every day, but
No.
it is a way to go through life that is with open arms. You embrace what happens to you in a healthy way, which allows you to be happier as opposed to every single thing being debilitating or traumatic.
Yeah, and you mentioned boundaries. That's such an important topic. We don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but setting boundaries, saying no, knowing, you know, telling clients, my partner does this. He says, I go dark after, I forget what time he does. And maybe it varies, maybe depending on what his workload is, but he goes dark at say 7 o'clock where I'm just spending time with my family now.
Yep.
And setting those kind of boundaries, training your clients to know that, I think is really important. And also, you're right. It's up to us individually to make these changes. And there's no reason we need to do it alone.
No.
There's plenty of folks out there who will give us support, like your therapist did, or a coach, or colleagues, or a mentor. I do a couple of days a week at the Lawyer Assistance Program in British Columbia.
Nice.
And I'm constantly talking to my clients about that. About this is, and of course they've reached out to me, so I already compliment them on that. That's a big plus. But I also tell them you need to reach out to folks who you can trust in
Yep.
your personal and professional life.
Yep. You're right. You can't do it alone. And I have to say, thankfully, my family has been a huge support structure. My husband, we've been together 19 years, married for 6. I couldn't have gotten through it without him. So
Yeah.
and I know not everybody's that fortunate, but you can find, like you said, a therapist or somebody else that may not be a family member to trust.
Oh, 2 more things before we end, Katherine. This has been super fast for me. Hopefully it has been
Yeah.
for you. But I was going to just mention an app also that I use regularly called 10% Happier.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that one.
For the listeners. Actually, this was started by a journalist on ABC News, who had a panic attack on the air,
Wow.
and that was his kind of come to Jesus moment.
Yep.
And he started this app, and he brings on a lot of experts who talk a lot about mindfulness and breathing exercises and things like that. But I want to give you one last opportunity to talk. Is there anything else you want to say about your book or about anything else?
Definitely. So one of the challenges that I've had to overcome is recognizing that I want to step back from my practice of personal injury. I don't want to not be a lawyer and I don't want to not practice, but I want to shift my efforts to helping other professionals overcome adversity and challenges in their life, like I've learned. So I've incorporated my own business. I've done the writing, the speaking, and now I'm starting to do the coaching, the one-on-one coaching as well.
Great.
So if anybody's interested in that, definitely reach out to me. But I'm happy to give away one of my books to the first person that reaches out to me.
Okay. How would they do that?
Yeah, you can email me at Kathryn at kfburmeister.com, and I'm sure you'll put that in the notes because I usually end up having to spell it out for everybody.
Yeah, we will do that.
Yeah, or even on Instagram, I'm on there as well. So all my social media is on my website, Kathryn F. Burmeister. So just reach out to me. The first person who does, I'm happy to send a book their way. But yeah, I just really want people to take the time to consider what their life is worth to them, honestly, and is it worth continuing to live it unhappy and unfulfilled? And I think everybody's going to say it's not. So taking the steps to change that for themselves is the first place to start.
Well, I'm excited that you're going out there and coaching because I think you're going to be a wonderful resource.
Thank you.
For lawyers, and we need more lawyers out there doing this because I think, unfortunately, but this is just the case, and probably the case in other professions, that lawyers you're automatically going to have credibility if you are a lawyer.
Yeah.
Or if you've been a lawyer. And if you're not, it's going to be, for some lawyers, it's going to be a little more of a challenge.
Yep.
So the fact that you have that experience is going to, you won't have to go through that building of the relationship that you would if you were just a personal coach without the legal experience.
Right. Well, I think too, also having gone through what I did
personally.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's easier to relate. Not to say that professionals are not good at doing that. They're literally, that's what they do for a living. But you're right. That's what I'm excited about hoping to tap into with people.
And one last thing, I just want to give you a shout out. Well, we began with me commenting on your being an animal loving lawyer.
Yes.
I want to end on that too. Just maybe 30 seconds to a minute. what you're doing around that and why it's on your website.
Sure. So I've done a lot of animal advocacy through the years, literally scaling fences in the sixth grade to rescue cats out of generators. But I right now do pro bono work occasionally for the Animal Legal Defense Fund when they need it, and advocating for animals, the laws to enforce, anti-cruelty laws and whatnot. But I currently have 4 cats and 1 dog. He actually just turned 9 months old. I lost my 2 oldest babies last fall. And
speaking of difficult grief.
yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah. Oh boy.
They're, I mean,
Yeah.
I say babies because I don't have children. I'm not going to have children. I genuinely believe they are my children to a degree. I'm not dressing them up, but
I am with you. I don't dress them up either. Our dog of 13 years died a year ago. And boy, it never gets easy, but at the same time, I'm going to get another dog.
Yep.
And that it'll never stop me from continuing to have dogs.
No, and I told my my boy last year, I said, I promised him I would adopt a shy baby because he was shy. And most people want, obviously, the extroverted, outgoing dog. And so sure enough, everything aligned. And I found this puppy, and he was right up my alley, would not come up to me at all. And so he came home, and of course now he's like Velcro. He's my shadow, and he loves my husband and has gotten used to him. And now he goes out with us to breweries. So yeah, they're the best.
Well, and animals, this is not unrelated to what we're talking about here. Animals can be a wonderful source of support, particularly during COVID. For me, our dog was a lifeline for me.
Yeah,
to just be able to get down on the ground with and just she helped me relax.
I always think of there's a little
perspective.
Yeah, there's a little cartoon I've seen before. And it's a stick figure facing the sun, and a dog's next to him. It says mindful, which is mind space full, and it's just all these thoughts going around his head. And then the next scene is mindful, MINDFUL, and just thinking about his dog and walking with his dog. And they help us put things in perspective as well.
Well, Kathryn, thank you so much. We've gone even a touch longer than we were supposed to, so I appreciate your giving your an hour plus of your time, because I think it's going to be so helpful for the folks who listen to this podcast. And I hope to speak with you again down the road and follow up with you and see how you're doing with all this.
Definitely. Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Kathryn. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. We love hearing from our loyal listeners, so please feel free to email us any questions, comments, suggested topics, or guest recommendations at the following address: feedback@thrivinglawyerspodcast.com. The Thriving Lawyers Podcast is brought to you by Real-Time Creative Learning Experiences, a national provider of continuing legal education and professional development programs that leave participants engaged, encouraged, and equipped to pursue meaningful and sustainable change in their practices, their lives, and the organizations they work in. And by Osborne Conflict Resolution, your experienced guides through the uncharted terrain of business and family law disputes, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Thriving Lawyers Podcast.